G'day, ZiggyD here, and welcome to my first impressions and skill gem analysis for the 1.3 skill Kinetic Blast. Oh yeah. So, this new skill is a wand attack skill, and there has been a fair bit of confusion about the mechanics of the skill, and it is quite complex. It's the first AoE wand skill. We've had skills that can be turned into AoEs essentially by, using less than multiple projectiles and PS and such. But this is the actual first wand skill that is truly AoE, actually has AoE mechanics on it. So if you'll allow me to remove here less than multiple and greater multiple projectiles, you can see the way the skill functions at its core is it fires a single projectile that then has a series of small explosions around the initial target. Now the very interesting thing here is that this is very much an AoE skill in every sense of the word, in that it's not a very good single target skill. If you use this on a single target, like a skeleton sitting by himself, maybe let's say this skeleton just here is a boss. Look, he looks pretty boss-like. If I fire a projectile here, the explosions will occur around him, but they won't ever hit him. Now, I've done a fair bit of testing with this, and I've never been able to get a stationary target explosion to hit the initial one. So there is that initial hit, and you can see there's a little explosion effect with it, but you can't hit them with multiple ones. So it's not like Molten Strike, in that with Molten Strike you can do enormous single target damage by essentially firing, hitting the target and then having a bunch of the explosion AoEs overlap. The design of it seems to be that no matter what you do, you can't get the explosions to overlap. So if I put Conk Effect in here, the explosions become smaller and the clustering becomes tighter. So the clustering is something like this now. Whereas if I take out Conk Effect and put in increased AoE, the clustering is much wider, but the explosions become wider. So you can imagine that, as each of these explosions become wider, they also spread out further, and as they become smaller, they cluster in smaller. So there's two AoE fields for this skill that are modified with Conk Effect and increased AoE, and both of them increase or decrease at seemingly the same rate. So the importance of this is that you can't really get them to overlap. Now the exception to that, however, is if I use something less than multiple projectiles, explosions from different projectiles can overlap. So hopefully I can hit these two guys with some of these here. Well, I can just do it with the wall. But you can see there's a bunch of overlapping explosions there when I use LMP or GMP, because the explosions from different projectiles can overlap and and hit multiple targets. So what else does this mean? What else does this mean? It's kind of, the skill seems like a bit of a hybrid between Tornado Shot and Molten Strike, but without the strong single target potential of either of those skills. However, it does have the very strong AoE potential of both of those skills, in that you can get the explosions to overlap if you're using it as an AoE skill for the purposes of wiping out massive packs very quickly. And I think the skill is going to do excellent at that. I think it's going to be a very, very powerful AoE skill. You are going to need a single target skill because it's not going to work very well as a single target. So I imagine something like Barrage if you're Elemental, or Power Siphon if you're Physical, are going to work pretty well. Frenzy maybe has some potential as well. But as we know, Frenzy is not very good in the current state of the game. But Kinetic Blast is a pretty high potential AoE skill, I think. So there had been some confusion around the AoE and the projectiles and how they interact. So as you can see, this is tagged as attack, AoE, and projectile, and essentially it's all attack. All of the damage is attack damage. All of the damage is wand attack damage. So any attack damage stuff, any wand attack damage stuff is going to increase the damage of this. And the usual damage mods are going to affect it. Let's leave that for now though, because that's going to add some extra confusion if I talk about that now. What does happen though is the initial one is quite clearly, the initial hit is quite clearly a projectile, and then the secondary hits are quite clearly area of effect. Now the confusion around this, both for myself, much of the community, and even some of the ZiggyD developers, was what the secondary damage is calculated based on. So the initial projectile fires out and hits a mob, and it has its own damage roll, it has its own accuracy roll. They share crit, however, so it has its own damage and accuracy roll. Now, I'm pretty 99% sure on this, guys, but it is still always take everything with a grain of salt with this sort of thing. But I'm pretty sure with this. I've been talking to Rory and Kyle about this skill pretty much for the past 2 days, and the secondary damage has its own damage and accuracy roll again. If you crit with the initial attack, the AoEs will all crit as well. That's pretty standard for Path of Exile, that skills always, it's either all or nothing for most skills. Now, the secondary damage, although it is also tagged as AoE, it also counts as projectile damage. Now this is where a lot of the confusion come from, because initially there was some thoughts that it wasn't tagged as projectile, and I thought that as well, and we were hypothesizing things like lesser multiple projectiles and greater multiple projectiles, which have less projectile damage, not affecting the AoEs because they were just AoE damage, they were just AoE attack damage, but they are indeed calculated off projectile damage as well. So this is good news in that you can use projectile nodes, you can use something like Sniper here, and it's going to increase the damage of the AoE explosions as well. It's also fantastic news for Fizz crit wanders, because it means you can use Ondar's Guile to evade, double your evasion against the AoE explosions. Whereas if it wasn't tagged as projectile, then you wouldn't have been able to evade your crits essentially, and you would have killed yourself to Fizz reflect. So that would have been a problem. So that's good news for Fizz crit wanders. Now, Rory did want me to put a little bit of a caveat in here that it might currently not be working that way. It might not be working as intended. As in, it might not be functioning with Ondar's Guile. So if you're playing in hardcore at the moment and using this and relying on Ondar's Guile to keep you alive, then maybe just be a little bit careful until they have guaranteed that it is that, because it's something they're going to look into and fix if it is not correct. But they do want it to be evadable with Ondar's Guile, so that they do want the AoE to be projectile based. Now, the end effect of this is that the damage modification from lesser multiple projectiles, greater multiple projectiles, and things like physical projectile attack damage all affect the AoE as well, even though the damage is rolled separately, so the AoE damage is not based off the initial hit. So if this does 100 damage, each of these isn't going to do 100 damage, they each have their own individual rolls. It's still going to be scaled by projectile damage, so that's all pretty good news. So the result of this isn't, as I was theory crafting earlier before the skill came out, this isn't the first skill that can use GMP and LMP together. Probably not a good idea. I think we're going to see probably Fizz characters using either GMP or LMP, maybe some bias towards LMP, and Ellie characters using GMP as is tradition. But the idea is that putting out a lot of projectiles is still really good, because you get those overlapping explosions, which against a pack can be really quite effective. So let's chuck in physical projectile attack damage here, and let's go find a pack, have a little bit of fun. You can see that the overlapping AoE damage is really quite impressive. Now, this is just kind of like, I'm just using like a Moonsorrow at this point, I don't have a good wand or anything, but the effect of the overlapping AoE is quite impressive against those large packs. And with GMP, it gets even a little bit more impressive, I'd say. The pros of the sheer amount of overlapping explosions might outweigh the con of the reduced damage. Assuming you can get most of those to connect, the damage becomes pretty bad against small targets like this. So here's the problem I see with this skill, mechanically speaking, is that packs that are tightly clustered, like let's say there's like 4 zombies sitting in that sort of area, often you'll hit them with only 1 or 2 of the projectiles from GMP, so LMP might be better in that particular scenario. I think I was using GMP and LMP together though. LMP might be better in that scenario, but even then, there's still going to be some issues where the explosions occur around. There's like this dead zone. It's almost got like a static, a shock nova style dead zone in the middle, which that probably raises some alarm bells, but it does mean against really small, tightly clustered packs, it's not going to be very effective. Against a group like this, it's going to work great, because there's enough targets there to soak up all of the projectiles, proc all of the explosions, and eat up all the damage. But 2 skeletons like this, you can see, I'm not hitting either of them with the explosions. Very rarely am I hitting this one that was standing behind him with the actual explosions. So it becomes better. This skill becomes better the larger the pack is. And then that becomes even more prominent with Pierce. Pierce is like really good on this skill. You can get Pierce from this cluster over here if you're playing like a Fizz crit build, and I think that might be popular. And of course the Pierce gem as well. Good thing about Pierce gem is it doesn't have any negative damage impact on the explosions either. So as with Pierce, let's take out LNP just here. With Pierce, each time it pierces, the explosions will proc. So I can get it to proc multiple times in a line as it pierces through each target. Now when you combine this with something like lesser multiple projectiles, you get 3 projectiles that go out, and if each one of those pierces and hits another set of targets, you're getting 6 sets of explosions and potentially even more. So the damage against very large packs becomes exponential with something like GMP and Pierce or LMP and Pierce. Now Chain has the same effect. Each hit will trigger an explosion, of course, but the damage loss on Chain might make it ineffective for physical-based builds. It might work with elemental builds, and I don't know about Chain, because What chain does is it makes the skill's strength stronger, which is massive AoE damage on massive packs. However, it's gonna make the smaller pack capabilities even worse, which means that when you're mapping and there's those 2 or 3 mobs that are kind of left by themselves, you either have to single target them or use your like very sort of subpar AoE attack against the small pack. Now here's something that's pretty interesting, guys. Let's say I'm using, let's just go GMP here. We'll go GMP here, and let's say I want to turn this into a single target skill. It's possible. It is possible to turn into a single target skill. Now I need to find another skeleton that's going to chase me to show you guys this. But this skill procs off walls, guys, and this skill is going to be insane on indoors maps. And if you can pull a boss into a corner or against a wall, here we go, this one might be close enough. What happens there is when the projectiles hit the wall, the clustering on the AoEs is extremely tight. So if I shoot in right here, I need to make sure I'm actually clicking on the wall just there. All of the explosions are going off in this area. So if you can pull a boss into a corner with you with this skill, it will do so much damage to it. Should I try Vegan? All right, this might not work. We'll try Vegan. Let's go Conk Effect, AoE. PS, GMP, physical projectile. That'll do. Let's go and fight Vegan inside here. Alright, this should be interesting. Come on down, sir. Come on down. Alright, not bad. Considering I'm only using a Moonsire here, and I have like not the best setup. I'm using an Elemental. This character is set up for Elemental, and I'm using a physical one, so that's not bad. That's not bad. So I think there's some potentially really high single target damage in indoors maps if you can pull a boss into a corner. So hopefully that did a good job of demonstrating that. Now I mentioned that this doesn't work very well against targets that you know, the initial hitting targets essentially. Now I was talking to Rory and we did sort of agree that knockback might have some potential. I kind of think that knockback is never really worth a gem slot, and it's going to be very borderline if it's worth a gem slot in this, but there is the potential, and maybe you guys want to explore it, that if you hit a mob with the initial projectile and knock them back, then they will be knocked into the range of the AoE explosion, so you can hit them twice instead of once. I don't know, maybe in some cases it will be worth it. Maybe even against packs it could be good, because if you hit 5 targets, knock each of them back into the AoEs, they're going to take more damage, and maybe it helps, but I don't know. I don't think it's going to be worth it, but it might be something you guys want to explore. Now the final thing I wanted to mention was something that I'm actually unsure about, and I'm going to kind of leave it to you guys to explore, but I'll explain why I'm unsure. I'm unsure about AoE scaling on this skill, whether it's actually worth it or not. Because the way that the clustering expands and contracts in both the AoE of the skill and the area in which it procs, I'm wondering whether something like increasing the area of effect is worth it. Conk Effect is nearly always worth it because of the huge amount of extra damage you get. So Conk Effect might still be worth it. It might make it a little bit more usable against smaller packs as well, so it might have some positive impacts. I don't know whether it's worth counteracting the decreased AoE with increases from the tree or with the increased AoE gem, because of the way it decreases the clustering as well. So makes it bigger. Like maybe if like you got like a really jam-packed high density map, increased area effect's going to be worth it, but I think in most scenarios, I'm wondering whether increased area effect is actually worth it. As I said, I don't exactly know, but I'll leave that for you guys to explore, and if you do sort of test it and feel like AoE is definitely worth it, let me know in the comments below. But I'm suspecting that increased area of effect is not really worth it, though because of the damage you can't really throw away Conk Effect. But it seems like the sort of skill where you can just kind of forget about the AoE and just play like a Fizz Crit Ranger Wanda, for example, and just not even worry about getting any sort of AoE scaling and just use Conk Effect for damage maybe. So guys, hopefully you found this interesting. If you have any more questions about the skill, I might have forgotten some things, so feel free to ask and I'll try and answer them in the comments below. Otherwise, I think this is a skill that has pretty good potential. I think this is going to be a very strong AoE skill. The way that the explosions can cluster against walls has some really nice sort of like cheesing potential for cheesing bosses and stuff, and the way that it works against very large packs like the exponential scaling, which when you're clearing maps very fast and clearing high density maps with pack size, then that sort of thing is very, very desirable in Path of Exile. So I think the skill's going to have very good potential. I don't know if it's going to be better than Power Siphon, to be honest. It might be better than Power Siphon in some scenarios, but Power Siphon might be more versatile. We'll see how that ends up playing. It should be interesting to see. Anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this breakdown of first impressions. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.